The longer you win, the more confident you become, but history has shown repeatedly that anyone can be beaten, including the very best in the sport of bodybuilding. Let's check out some of the things legends like Shawn Ray has to say about modern legends like Phil Heath and old-school champs like Dorian Yates. Shawn Ray slams Phil Heath. The legendary former bodybuilder Shawn Ray sat down with the very popular Patrick Bet David in a lengthy interview recently where the two discussed many topics, including Phil Heath. Patrick Bet David is known to interview top names in the industry, and he's arguably one of the best at it too. Well, there were definitely a few heated moments, but overall, the discussion was very eye-opening and touched on many of the concerns about the current status of the Olympia brand. Shawn Ray talked about how bodybuilders nowadays are so in control of everything due to social media that it's hard to get them to market themselves outside of that. He made the point that bodybuilders nowadays also don't necessarily have any type of mentorship, and then when something happens or an athlete gets into some trouble, then it's like they're on their own. Another point Shawn Ray was trying to make was that even though the competitive aspect may not have been up to par, especially last year, seeing as many of the top guys from previous Olympias did not compete, the Olympia still sold out regardless. "We didn't need them," explained Ray, referring to Phil Heath, Sean Roden, Ramy, and Kai Green not participating in 2019. But Patrick Bet David responded by saying that someone needs to call Heath and ask what needs to be done in order to have him back at the Olympia. "I'll tell it like it is, love Phil. But the brand is doing just fine. The Olympia doesn't need Phil Heath to make the Olympia." But he still believes Heath should have at least been at the prior Olympia to hand out the trophy, if anything, as it is the competition that made him who he is. But Patrick Bet David was adamant about suggesting the organization should have been reaching out, and according to Shawn Ray, they did. But apparently, Heath had other plans rather than attending the Olympia. This is not the first time Shawn had a rather strong opinion on Phil Heath. Previously, once the bodybuilder veteran weighed in on how he thinks Phil Heath would compare on stage to Dorian Yates. Shawn said that Phil Heath boasts better arms, especially triceps, than Dorian. Phil also has better abdominals and thighs, but the real problem for him will be Dorian's frame. He said, "That wide back of Dorian Yates is going to make Phil Heath look even more narrow than he actually is. He's going to be just as hard as Phil Heath, especially from the rear, when you see those frickin' calves popping out. The back is Dorian's all day long, but he's going to battle with him in that back double bicep. But when they open up in that back lat spread, Dorian opens up way too wide for Phil. Front lat spread way too wide for Phil."
There is no federational check going to anybody. The IFBB doesn't write a check to anyone except for the winners of the pro competitions. He's not the guy, okay? Because he doesn't have the...
Does he know that?
He knows that.
Okay.
Our sport is not at that level. It is still a cult sport. We're not the UFC. We don't have billions of dollars of value. We're living in a time now where the athlete can control the way they look and how they're perceived. When you start talking about the athletes are so divided, so dispersed, and so individualized.
Bring them together.
Can Phil Heath be beaten? Anyone can be beaten. That's what any bodybuilding fan knows for sure. Arnold, with his 7 Mr. Olympia titles, was beaten by the myth Sergio Oliva. Lee Haney, with 8 Mr. Olympia titles, was beaten by the Lion of Lebanon, Samir Bannout, in 1983. King Dorian Yates was beaten by TotaLee Awesome Lee Haney in 1991. Ronnie Coleman was beaten by the entire Mr. Olympia lineup in Helsinki, Finland in 1992 to finish dead last, before ultimately dominating the stage with 8 consecutive titles. What's the general verdict? Let's talk about Phil's condition. Who beats Phil on condition? Honestly, no one. Phil shows up grainy and dry with clear separations and striations from head to toe. Ramy is touted as Phil's biggest threat by some, but this is where Heath utterly destroys him. Some definitely come close to Phil's condition, such as Dexter or Bonac, when they are peaked perfectly, but Phil is so consistent that even when he is a tiny bit off his best, as he was last year, he's still in better shape than just about anyone else on that stage. Don't count on Phil being off, especially after him having to hear about his looking like crap last year. Odds are that he will repeat the insanely crisp condition he showed in 2011 when he won the first time. According to Shawn Ray, however secure Phil may feel about his 4 Sandos, the longer he competes, the more slippery that title is to hold on to. Don't forget the 1998 Mr. Olympia contest in New York City. After 6-time Mr. Olympia Dorian Yates pulled out due to injury and retired for good, a middle-of-the-pack athlete in the form of Ronnie Coleman leapfrogged over at least 5 future IFBB Pro Hall of Fame bodybuilders to not only win the 1998 title, but hold on to it for a record-tying 8 consecutive years. That being said, Phil's greatest challenge is not the guys he competes against, but being better than Phil Heath of last year. If Phil slips up from last year's appearance, a number of guys could beat him, including Kai, Dexter, Dennis, Shawn, or Ramy. Which of these guys could it be? One or all of them? Shawn ended up being right, and this was only proven as Shawn Roden defeated Phil Heath in 2018, snapping Heath's streak of 7 victories.
91 at 31 years old, won it and walked away. Ronnie Coleman, progressively worse as Mr. Olympia. Dorian Yates, progressively worse with age. Phil Heath is no different. He's human. He's not superhuman. No, I mean, listen, Ron, objectively speaking, we've never seen it done. The only person that was able to do it was Haney, and he came off of a drug-free 1990 Mr. Olympia. And when you're battling the core, the stomach, and it was bad this year, it was bad the year before, and it was bad the year before that. These surgeries are not making him better at an advanced age of 40 next year. Palumboism, and yes, I said it, is something that comes that you cannot stop if you don't change what you're doing in your contest prep. Phil would be training as a very caution-driven bodybuilder at the age of 40, coming off of 2 surgeries, with the uncertainty and the lack of confidence, whereas Phil would be coming in there limping in after another surgery with a lot of second guessing along the way. I don't think Phil is cut from the same cloth that he can suddenly surpass someone that's a first-time champion. So this next year's competition is not going to be easier than this one, and I think that does not bode well for Phil. If he takes a year off, he's done.
Dorian Yates on Phil Heath. So what does Dorian Yates, former Mr. Olympia, have to say about Phil Heath? Well, he hasn't said anything about the 7 times Mr. Olympia winner. However, Yates did express his dislike for modern bodybuilding. Dorian Yates has mentioned before how he has little interest in today's bodybuilding industry, but he's revealed the specifics as to all the reasons he dislikes modern bodybuilding and the mentality behind today's lifters. And it's pretty interesting. Dorian Yates believes that people don't love the training for bodybuilding like they used to in the past, in his era. Instead of taking joy in it, it seems they only do it because they have to. In the interview, he went as far as to say even the level of conditioning has deteriorated rapidly. He also gave modern bodybuilders and fitness enthusiasts an expressed warning on steroid usage.
And also there's a psychological side to it, psychological addiction. If I had not continued with my professional bodybuilding career at that point, that I wouldn't have taken steroids after. I would have stopped. Right. You know, you can't keep that level of development when you stop taking those hormones. You will come down. It's off all the other medications. So maybe it's a cheap way for the NHS to avoid. And I remember when I first started training, I asked a couple of guys in the gym, and they were a bit like, oh no, we don't take that.
That's all for this video, folks. See you another time.